So we have a new Biden scandal for everybody. This one's a week old, but I really wanted to talk about it because I feel like this is one where I have a dissenting opinion and I'm going to walk into a minefield here. So Joe Biden said that 10 to 15% of Americans, quote, are just not very good people. And he also said the vast majority of the people are decent. And this was in an online town hall. And the Trump campaign is now using the footage to attack Biden and his team. So, now, many people have seen this, and the response is, well, here we go again. This is Joe Biden and his irredeemable, deplorable moment. Remember when Hillary said, like, oh, the Trump supporters, or like at least half the Trump supporters are a basket of deplorables, or they're irredeemable deplorables, whatever she said. I don't remember the exact phrase. I know deplorables was in it. And so that was a big scandal, and then they clobbered her with that. And then also there was the Mitt Romney famous, 47% of Americans are takers, and my job is not to represent the takers. So people are now comparing this to that. Now, the criticism of Biden that I agree with is this. As a politician, you never want to say something like this. But I will say, I don't think that those things are comparable, because 47%, that's Mitt Romney saying half the country are basically pieces of trash, and I'm not going to represent them. And he, of course, just meant Democrats. And in the case of Hillary, the implication was that like all Trump voters are irredeemable deplorables. But I think her actual words were like half of them are irredeemable deplorables. But even in that instance, it would be a much higher percentage than what Biden's saying here. Biden's saying 10 to 15% are just not very good people, meaning 10 to 15% are bad people. And I have to say, I'm really not outraged by this at all. And I'm not outraged because I don't think that's that far off. So I've talked about this before on the show, but like there's a solid 20 or 25% block of the country that are like hardcore evangelical fundamentalists. And, you know, I don't know the exact percentage, but think of the hard percentage that are like just super duper racist. I don't agree with Hillary that it's like Trump, all Trump supporters are like half of Trump supporters. No, that's not it. I'm talking about the ones who are seriously like they could listen to a speech from Richard Spencer and be like, nailed it. I'm talking about those people. What percentage make up those people? What percentage make up just the complete and utter psychopaths with zero empathy, no sympathy, cannot put themselves in somebody else's shoes, whether it be murderers, whether it be rapists, whether it be big company CEOs who have, you know, wouldn't hesitate for a second to lay people off and ruin their lives and not care about it. I think the spectrum of discussion that's reasonable when it comes to what percentage of people are bad per se, and I get that a lot goes into the definition, you know, what exactly constitutes being bad, and how did somebody get that way? Is it nature? Is it nurture? How? But I'd say anywhere from 1% to 20%, that's the realm of discussion that I think is actually like totally reasonable. And even though as a politician, Biden shouldn't be saying this, truth is always a defense. And, you know, you can come after him and say, come on, man, like, don't say that. And, I mean, he could say, I think it's true. And that's not, I think Mitt Romney was dead wrong. I think Hillary was dead wrong. I think he's close to right. Now, my numbers actually, I think probably a little bit lower, maybe 5% of people. But, yeah, it's not, like, I disagree with, there's a right-wing view on this and a left-wing view on this. The left-wing view, generally speaking, although there are distinctions, is that, hey, people are generally good, and they're inherently good. And, like, if they become bad, there has to be a reason for it, but really at their core, they're good. And the right-wing view is more of a hardcore nature argument of, like, people... Like, I don't trust anybody. People are kind of inherently bad, and we have to, like, civilize them through society. But at our core, we're all, kind of selfish beings and people are like inherently bad. And my opinion on that has always been that everybody's right and everybody's wrong at the same time. So what I mean is, I think there's some percentage of people that are basically inherently good. And I also think there's some percentage of people that are like inherently bad. But then I think most people, in fact, the overwhelming majority of people, are both good and bad. And like, we're a mix. So in other words, philosophers have debated this for a long time. Like, are people inherently good or inherently bad? And how do we work through this issue? And I think that there is no such thing as like a default human nature setting. People aren't just good. People aren't just bad. I think that it's what I just described. Some are good, some are bad. Most are a mix of both good and bad. And it's complicated. It's complex. It's not like there's no easy, simple answer. And then you get into the deeper conversation of, well, how did somebody become good or bad? Like, again, generally speaking, the left-wing view is, well, it has to do with like the environment they were raised in. And it has nothing to do with nature, how they are innately. It has to do with nurture and how they were raised and the culture and the environment and all that stuff. And that'll dictate how they are. And my response to that is, in many instances, yes. In many instances, yes. People are very, very influenced by their surroundings and by how they were raised and the culture and society and the environment and all that stuff. But again, that's not totally true, because we all know there's been plenty of cases of like people who were raised in what's supposed to be the ideal environment with loving parents and all that stuff, and then they become vicious serial killers. So obviously there are some instances of, yes, there's some wiring that's off and somebody's like a vicious, psychopathic, sociopathic murderer, So even with being raised in what's supposed to be an ideal situation. So in other words, there's no default human nature setting, and then we're all working off that. Everything's a mess, and the world's a complicated place. And some people are born with some wiring off, and some people are born just like inherently really kind and giving and nice and good. And then I think most people are probably a mix of both of those things that we all have. Like, I would file myself under the good and bad, category, where I think the overwhelming majority of people are, where it's like, yeah, you have positive instincts and you have negative instincts. And again, like I don't know exactly how I got this way. Is it mostly from nurture, or is some of it just wiring in my brain? I think all that feeds into it. All of it feeds into it. So, I think that on the left, there is this kind of, people don't want to ever entertain the idea of like, no, there might be some percentage of the population that's just not, like I tweeted about this and Matt Taibbi responded to me and said, well, hold on, I thought that if you're a liberal, then you're supposed to believe that, people can effectively be rehabilitated. And like, that's why we shouldn't have the death penalty. That's why we shouldn't have, punishment when it comes to the criminal justice system, and it should be geared more towards rehabilitation. And my response to him was like, I believe as a matter of principle that we should not have the death penalty because we killed the wrong people, and we should rehabilitate because it's the moral thing to do. It's the right thing to do. But I also said to him, I'm not under any illusions, though, that everybody is reformable or everybody can be rehabilitated. I don't think that's true at all. I think that there are instances of TFGs, too far gones. People who, there are serial killers who you're just not going to reform. You're not going to rehabilitate them. Something's off. There's something off. And so, now the serial killer is an extreme example, but there are people with, psychopathic behavior that manifests in financial crimes, for example. And it could be laundered through a perfectly legal route. Like if you go work on Wall Street, for example. So I think in like that person, I would put in the category of bad. Now, I know Biden's not referring to like Wall Street bankers or like vicious psychopathic police officers. But they exist. Like there are a certain percentage of the society they're bad. They're bad. Now, again, he might have a slight overestimate here of 10 to 15%. That might be a little bit on the high side. but I think it's probably 5% of people that are just bad. And you could find them in almost every walk of life. You know them in your life. You've seen them. You've met them. Some maybe in your family or whatever, where it's like, there's just no hope. And again, we should try to ameliorate the situation and fix and all that, rehabilitate, but just don't have any illusions. Like this idea that, are we? You answer the question then. See, this is the point that I was making to people. You answer the question. Biden says 10 to 15% of Americans are not very good people. What do you think the number is of people who are, quote, not very good people? And I have to say this, I know it might sound a little harsh, but if you think that the answer to that is truly 0% of people are not very good people, I think that's so delusional. Because then how do you explain the serial killer who was raised in a perfect environment, in an ideal situation? Now, I get it. There could be some biological wiring off or whatever, but still, you could categorize that as bad because we all agree serial killing is bad. We all agree a serial child rapist is bad. We all agree that those things exist. So what percentage are bad? And what constitutes bad? I'm talking about the criminals in that respect, but I'm also lumping in, people who are off because the wiring's off, and people who are off because of other reasons. Like, having a rough go of it. And it might not be their fault that their life was a mess, but if you end up becoming, a vicious criminal or whatever it may be, or somebody who's in Al-Qaeda, or somebody who's a hardcore evangelical fundamentalist Christian, or somebody who's in the KKK, and like, what percentage of society is not very good people? Again, I think Biden's not far off. I'd say maybe 5% of people are not very good people, which again, generally speaking, that's a positive thing, right? Like we have 5% of just bad apples, then 5% of people who are just so overwhelmingly kind and giving and like just really good and don't have a negative bone in their body. And then that leaves 90% of people who are like both. We have both aspects in ourselves. We have the capacity for very good, and we have the capacity for very evil and very bad. And so, I don't know. I think that the reason why, because it's not a politically correct conversation to have, because you don't want to ever feel like you're writing off a certain percentage of the population. Now, again, I'm being clear. You don't write them off. You try to rehabilitate people, but have no illusions about it. There are some people who are beyond reform. That just is the nature of reality. So anyway, how would you answer that question? What percentage of society are just not very good people? My guess is conservatives, many conservatives would probably say over 50% are not very good people. Many lefties would say actually 0. I think we're all good at our core. Some lefties would say that. Again, I have a view that's a little bit of a mix of both, where probably 5% of people are just, kind of too far gone in a variety of different ways. And they got to that position of being too far gone, some through nature, some through nurture. But like, there are some people who are not very good people. Anyway, I'm rambling on here, but the reason why I wanted to have this conversation is because it gets into the broader philosophical discussion, where there are some philosophers who say people at their core are just evil, selfish, greedy pieces of trash. And then there are other philosophers who say, no, people at their core are actually very like noble and they mean well. And I just wanted to state, based off of this Biden article, this Biden like gaffe is the hook here, that I actually don't think either one of those is correct. I think some people are bad, some people are good, and most people are both good and bad. And then, yes, your nurture and your environment will kind of determine how and when those different sides of you come out. So anyway, I know that this one's a more controversial segment of mine, but I wanted to throw it out there. And I'm very curious how you guys would answer that question. What percentage of people do you think are, quote, not very good people?